All right, well, we're live here, Quinn. So I want to say thank you so much for joining me. As just a little intro to everybody, my name is Marty Park, and we're really doing this series about elevating extraordinary entrepreneurs. I know so many incredible business owners, and a lot of them run businesses they do a great job. It's exceptional companies, and they're sort of unknown. And so my guest today is Quinn Cook, who is the president of a company called BWI. And Quinn was a great example to kick off this series of an exceptional entrepreneur. And so, Quinn, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Marty. Appreciate the introduction. So
I'd like to tell me a little bit about or tell all of the viewers and listeners, what does BWI do?
absolutely, yeah. So BWI stands for Built with Integrity, and BWI is a domestic manufacturer and distributor of UN-rated bulk bags, tarps, crate covers, and other industrial textile products. So we also import and distribute a number of products, geotextiles, sandbags, other industrial bags, and we have been doing that in Western Canada since about 2006. So we've got 12 full-time staff, full service sewing department, and then 12,000 square foot warehouse. We're currently
Wow.
serving industries such as mining, oil and gas, agriculture and forestry, food processing, the manufacturing and transport. As far as our core values go at BWI, we would be providing value through our products that just meet and exceed our clients' expectations and operating with integrity. So that's us in a nutshell.
I love that BWI stands for business with integrity, right? One of my questions for you is, I guess, clearly a B2B type of business, and you mentioned Western Canada. I assume that your business, though, is international too, just with where you pull products from. You mentioned manufacturing. Do you guys, I guess, deal on a global basis in some capacity or in some ways?
In some capacities, we do. We do export to the United States, Mexico, and then we don't just dabble in Western Canada. We do have some business on the East Coast, so we do have a global reach in some aspects.
Okay. One of my questions, I think this is an interesting part of your story, that so many people build a business, but as you said, you've started this, or they start a business, and you mentioned when the business started. Now, when the business started, you would have been just a teenager. So do you mind telling me a little bit about the situation that led up to you taking over the business?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for asking. The circumstances leading up to me taking over were they were unfortunate and they transpired pretty quickly. I had been working at BWI for 3 months, working closely with my father, Brian, our founder as well, and he had passed away quite suddenly. So there was a quick requirement for strong leadership to step in and take over for Brian, and that's what I had done at BWI. That transpired in about 3 months, so it was a steep learning curve for myself.
Right. I mean, yeah, I can only imagine the impact of sort of that idea. And I think, if I recall, you guys were sort of in talks to be like, you're just come back to the family business from working in a number of other companies. Maybe there was some talk, and then all of a sudden it's Monday and you're now taking over the whole business.
Yeah, it transpired quite quickly. So, and losing my tenure in my last industry, it was difficult, but
Right.
a good challenge.
The good news is, I mean, if you're going to come into a new business, I guess being able to come in as the president is a good role to play. But with that comes so much pressure. How did you feel coming into the business where, I mean, there's such a steep learning curve, pressure? Can you describe a little bit for me just how you felt in those early days?
I was flustered, to be fully honest, dealing with a little bit of scaredness and excitement that comes with taking
Sure.
over a business. Like I said, the learning curve was steep, and having previously worked in transportation and manufacturing, there was a bit of crossover, but there was a lot that needed to be learned rather quickly.
Did you? I think one of the interesting things I'd bring up there, Quinn, is that so many people don't feel that they start a business, and so if you take the typical startup, they start a business and then get into all the moving parts of a business, and oftentimes they don't feel like they know enough or that they have adequate skills. And even when you've got sort of a longer runway, you can feel a little bit overwhelmed as an entrepreneur. Even as a seasoned entrepreneur, there's times where you feel overwhelmed. So I can only imagine what it's like where your runway was, really a short period and surrounded by a really dramatic event personally, right? That it had to be in some ways a little overwhelming to start out like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, overwhelming is a great way to describe it. I enjoyed the challenge, and
Yeah.
ultimately, I think if you're not challenged, you're not going to grow personally. So,
And I don't mind saying, I mean, I've told you this personally, but to say it on this forum, that your ability to pick up all of the pieces of the business and get moving and work through that, both personally and then successfully with the business, I think is really exceptional. And it's one of the reasons I think that this idea of elevating extraordinary entrepreneurs fits you as a guest on this so appropriately. My other question is, when you took over the business, what would you say were the biggest challenges in those first 3 to 6 months?
yeah, we had some challenges. The first challenge was managing legacy staff. With many workplaces, I think the introduction of a new leader shaking things up, we had some fight back on status quos and who was responsible for what. But ultimately, once we got, duties and responsibilities figured out, we were a lot stronger company. There was a secondary challenge as well too, and that was myself just getting up to speed. This meant getting to know the business, the products, clients, all of our staff we have. And ultimately, I think every industry has its own nuances, and learning the nuances of this industry, that was one of the challenges. It can be technical.
I think one of the things that, if you and I opened up an ice cream shop, we could be able to say, hey, we've got some idea as to how this should go, right? And I think one of the challenges I appreciate is that you move into a business where you're talking about industrial textiles, bags, you're dealing with international markets, you're dealing with suppliers, sometimes overseas, you've got internal production. I mean, there's so many moving pieces to a complex business that is not something anybody would have experienced just sort of naturally as a customer, right? So you couldn't take any customer experience and go, oh, I know what it's like to be a customer and I can apply this. So that must have been challenging too, just that to have to really deep dive knowledge-wise into so many aspects of the business.
Absolutely. Being a manufacturer and a distributor adds a lot of complexity to a business. We don't just distribute, we make what we distribute as well too. So another layer
Right.
of complexity.
One of the things I was wondering about is now sort of seeing where the business has gone over the last few years. That, I mean, in the last year, certainly you guys have, every year that you've been running it, the business has continued to get better in terms of more efficient, revenues have gone up, profits gone up, all of that. Can you tell me a little bit about how things are running now and even some of the changes or some of the things you're working on in the business?
Yeah, absolutely. We're on track to break an all-time sales record this year, and we're ecstatic.
That's great.
Ultimately, I have to attribute that to the hard work of our sales and manufacturing team. Without their efforts this year, I don't think we would have been able to achieve what we're going to do. So big shout out to the team ultimately at BWI. I think the increase in sales and business this year have been attributed to, like I said, the work of our staff, and then also the conditions we're seeing in the global supply chain.
With what's your role been in that success?
My role in that success has been really getting a good foundation for our team, and ultimately, I think putting the accountability back on the individuals of this company. So it's not a one-man show here. Really, the collective efforts of everyone contribute to the success of BWI and ultimately our client's success.
No, I love that. And I appreciate that, like a good leader, being able to point to the team as the ones who've really delivered on that. I would have to argue with you a little bit and say that you've got a pretty key role in some of that growth and success the past year too, right?
Thanks.
So
yeah.
You don't have to say that, but I will say that. Tell me a little bit about so I think there's been a lot of changes within your business since you took over. And I'm curious, could you talk a little bit about some of the changes that took place in the business, the initial ones, and maybe walk through some of the things that you've implemented to help really move the business from I'll call it decent or maybe mediocre performance to what I think is much stronger performance now? What are some of the things that you've implemented or changed?
Certainly. One of the big changes that comes to mind was when I came in, I identified that we did have a lot of eggs in one basket. So the further diversification of our supply chain has really strengthened BWI in terms of what can be offered at what time and what price to who. So having more factories and more countries of origins from that we import really helps our clients out because they have more options. So.
Right. A lot less
Another,
dependency on one, right? On one source or one location, those types of things.
absolutely, absolutely. Another key change would have been just identifying some underperforming product lines, just eliminating them, which would help us focus on our core business, ultimately being bulk bags, tarps, and covers.
Right.
Mhm.
What about internally, like some of the changes you made, systems wise or people wise, or that sort of thing?
We have had some change up in terms of people. So that's been beneficial to the business. In terms of systems, though, I'm excited. We've identified a lot of inefficiencies sort of in our enterprise resource systems, and we've decided to implement a new full service ERP because currently our accounting and production systems don't talk as well as we'd like. So that'll be implemented hopefully Q2 of 2022, further optimizing our production department and, how we distribute the products which we make.
Right. I mean, and Quinn, I'll mention, like you sort of, I know that in this format it's quick to talk about, but you really touch on software and systems that way. You touch on changing people, you touch on changing suppliers and access to different markets. In some cases, recognizing, diversification. And so we say it as, I just want to point out to people listening that you talk about some of those things. And I think you and I both know, having gone through that it's not just a, hey, let's diversify today, right? That there's actually a lot of strategy and execution that goes into all of those things: changing team, diversifying markets, changing internal systems, adding KPIs for staff, key performance indicators. There's a lot of change you've made in that business in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. KPIs that they've been so beneficial in helping in terms of a managerial tool. Thanks. Yeah, no, absolutely.
yeah. I just, because, I always get a kick out of when sometimes people glance over what really are major projects within a business. And it's easier, in some cases, it's easier when the business starts versus in your case where you're already given existing staff and existing systems and existing suppliers. And then sometimes, as you said, you have coming in with new expectations really rocks the boat a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
You experienced at least a little bit of that.
I did experience a bit of that when I first stepped in. I think rocking the boat is a good way to describe it. So ultimately, I think we're making an omelet here and we do have to break a few eggs, and it's, yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to ask you, Quinn, what were some of the biggest lessons that you've learned since taking over the business? What would you say were some of your biggest lessons?
Well, some of the biggest lessons I've learned are, okay, communication is probably the number one most important thing in a manufacturing division. If we don't have that inter-department communication between, our cutting operators, our sewing operators, our printing technicians, it really can hurt the business if we're not communicating perfectly and crystal clear. Little slip-ups in production can cost us a lot down the road. So communication was a big one for me. I guess if I was to quote Benjamin Franklin, one good quote I'd like to say is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So in other words, we need to be proactive in all areas of our business, from the preventative maintenance of manufacturing assets to just helping our clients look 3, 6, 9 months out for staying supplied during a year with a strained global supply chain. So proactivity is a massive one.
Wow, that's a great one. Any others come to mind?
Yeah, actually, I like to quote Benjamin Franklin. So I got one
Yeah,
more, and
sure.
it's yeah. So one of the lessons I've learned is the bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten. So
Hmm.
we're not the cheapest date out there, and our focus is adding value and providing quality products. For example, on some of our mill direct or factory direct orders, we have a very low rejection rate. And I'm just learning that quality is very important in terms of, maintaining relationships with our clients long term.
I love those answers, Quinn. I
Mm.
mean, it is the fact that I think immediately in manufacturing or in the space you're in, do you think the first answer around lessons might be around technology or about production efficiencies or something? And the fact that you bring it back to something that's people oriented, like communication, I think is such a universal takeaway that I would say the weakest link in a business really is the people, right? And then their ability to communicate in order to be able to execute properly. But I also love your your Benjamin Franklin. And you and I have talked about price, that there's nothing worse than being at lower price, and let's race to the bottom.
Mhm.
And you guys obviously, I really appreciate you using that quote because it's true. When things don't work out, if somebody got a bad order from you guys because of low quality, that has that. I mean, it could be a decade before they came back to you to out of desperation to maybe ask for a quote or come back into your circle. But if you can always maintain that high quality and deliver, I like to compare a lot of those things to commercial insurance. Everybody wants to worry about price the day they buy it. And the second after that, all they really want to know is that they're secure. They're going to get great service if they have a car accident or there's a fire. And when you really get into what people want, it's always about quality and service. And so I appreciate your answers. I think they're so beneficial for anybody, no matter what their business is. If they took those as takeaways for their company, would be really, really sharp. Let me ask you, if there was a piece of advice to the people that are listening in for us today, if there was a piece of advice you'd give now as a successful entrepreneur, what would you suggest as a piece of advice you dole out?
This piece of advice I think you and I have talked about before, and it's paramount in terms of entrepreneurship. We need to make sure that we're maintaining a work-life balance, and I learned that very
Mm,
quickly thrusting myself in here. As soon as you start tipping those scales of balance between work and life, you're going to find one area is going to start to drop off. That might be your work performance or your home life. Both areas are important, and I think balance is very critical in those areas. So,
Quinn, can I ask you to drill down on that a little bit? Because I think one of the challenges I hear is when people say, well, yeah, I get that intellectually, but you don't understand how much stuff I have to do at work. And then I've got, stuff at home. And I look at the calendar or a day and there's just not enough time. And you certainly know what it's like to have a to-do list as long as your arm. Um, how do you balance that when you really there's always more and more things you could be doing at work? How do you make that decision, or how do you discipline yourself to say, no, I'm going to cut it off here, and I'm now going to, find that focus, or take the Friday to get the long weekend? Have you figured out, is there a personal sort of method you use to maintain that balance, or be disciplined about it?
yeah, I think one of the solutions I found would be just proactive scheduling. If I can think
Mm,
60 days out and just book my holidays and stay firm to those commitments, that's been beneficial. But if I'm looking, I mean, with a schedule right now, we're booked 2, 3 weeks out at all times. You really have to plan for that personal time. And if you don't plan, then you're probably not going to end up taking it. Um, that I would say another one too is just carving out some time in your day to take 15 minutes just to ground yourself,
mm.
take a walk, listen to a podcast, just do what cools you down in the short term.
Beautiful. Those are great
Mhm.
suggestions. I appreciate that a lot. I think that you use this word a couple times, and I want to mention it because I think it's sort of an underlying theme of my approach, your approach now, but a lot of really successful entrepreneurs I know is, so many people who feel like they're on the treadmill, like the hamster running on the wheel. I think are reactive and tactical every day in their business, right? Like do, reactive, what's on fire. And I think one of the things you sort of talk about is this proactive and strategic approach where it's, as you said, you're leading clients. Like, What do your orders look like? What are your needs 3, 6, 9 months into the future? Managing your schedule proactively, setting time aside, taking ownership of that, being strategic, even down to, your personal calendar to keep that work-life balance. So I really appreciate, and I just wanted to bring that up. There's a theme there and a way you operate now in the business and personally that I think is really different than a lot of people who sometimes really are on that, just can't get off the treadmill that's going at 9.2 and they're running like crazy, right?
Certainly.
Quinn, if I give you if there's anything else that you want to throw out that I haven't touched on, is there any other comments or thoughts that you'd want to share?
Overall, I just think it's important that we're optimistic. I know we're coming into the holiday season, and I'm hearing a lot of negative news about how there's going to be delays on Christmas toys, and they'll be here in January. So, try to stay out of your head. Don't watch too much news, and just maintain optimism. I think we've gone through, a pretty rough year in the pandemic, and ultimately we're going to pull through as a collective society. So,
I love it.
Yeah.
Quinn, thank you. I think that's a great parting measure, right? I mean, I think back to a year ago where maybe Christmas you couldn't have it. Now the ability to be surrounded by friends and family at least is an option to be thankful for. So I want to say, hey, for everybody that's been listening in, thank you so much. Quinn, thank you to you for your insights and your great answers to my questions. For anybody who might be in one of the industries that Quinn and BWI serve, you can check out their website at bwi-1.com, or you can connect with Quinn on LinkedIn. You can follow him. BWI as a company is on LinkedIn, so check that out, and also on Facebook. And again, thank you everybody for tuning in and watching us. If you need more information or want to connect with me, use @MartyPark or @TheMartyPark rather on Instagram. And again, Quinn, have a great weekend, and thanks so much for your time. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Marty.